The story begins in the 1910s. In 1991, Alistair Croft, 31 years old, moved to Ashton City with his wife, Eleanor, and daughter, Heather. They rented a 2-story storefront, living upstairs, and running a building materials, wholesale, and retail business downstairs. It was the beginning of the Western economic boom. Although Alistair didn't have a higher education, he was hardworking. His wife, Eleanor, was also a traditional woman who knew how to manage the household. With the husband working outside and the wife managing the home, they quickly built a thriving business. By the end of 1993, Alistair owned his own sheet metal processing plant and registered a building decoration company. His daughter Heather had turned 13 and excelled in her studies. Through connections, Alistair got her into Ashton Grammar School, the best middle school in the area. In 1996, Alistair's company and factory expanded several times over. The annual cash flow exceeded $50 million, and the total assets exceeded $100 million. He became a well-known entrepreneur in Ashton City. That year, Eleanor's cousin, Ronald, came from their hometown, hoping to work in Alistair's company. Alistair knew Ronald was a good-for-nothing back home, gambling and causing trouble, never having held a steady job. Initially, he wanted to refuse, but Eleanor's elders called 3 or 5 times to persuade him. Even his terminally ill mother-in-law made a special trip to Ashton City with Eleanor's uncle. Eleanor's uncle said Eleanor's father had 5 brothers. Ronald is the eldest. He's almost 40 and has achieved nothing. His wife ran away with another man. You are the only successful one in the family. If you don't help, our Croft family will lose face in town. Alistair had no choice but to let Ronald be the office director, responsible for managing the company's vehicles and security. At first, Ronald was honest, going to work on time, every day. But after a month, his hooligan habits resurfaced. He started to falsify accounts and steal timber from the warehouse to sell. Alistair caught him twice and wanted to fire him, but Eleanor's uncle and family would come crying and making a scene, forcing him to back down. In the summer of 1997, a fire broke out in an office building renovation project contracted by Alistair's company, killing 3 workers seriously, injuring 7, and slightly injuring more than a dozen others. The fire directly caused more than $500,000 in losses. As the legal representative of the company, Alistair had to take responsibility for such an incident. He sought legal advice from a lawyer who happened to be my mentor. For the sake of narrative convenience, let's call him Lawyer Hugh. The first meeting between Lawyer Hugh and Alistair took place in the canteen of Alistair's factory. Alistair had contacted Lawyer Hugh by phone, saying that he couldn't leave the factory due to urgent processing tasks, and pleaded with him to come to the factory, offering to send a car to pick him up. Lawyer Hugh had just bought a Ford car and declined Alistair's offer, driving there himself. When they met, Alistair's family of 3 was there. Eleanor, a quiet woman, barely spoke, only occasionally wiping away tears with a handkerchief. Alistair's communication skills were also weak. After all, he hadn't studied much and struggled to get to the point when speaking. Lawyer Hugh, however, was very patient, carefully asking about the details of the case several times. Unfortunately, Alistair couldn't explain it clearly. At this point, His daughter Heather tugged at his sleeve and said, "Dad, let me explain." Alistair's daughter, Heather, was 17 years old and a sophomore at Ashton Grammar School. Her appearance combined her parents' best features. She was over 1.7 meters tall and had inherited her father's delicate features and her mother's deep eyes. Most importantly, she spoke clearly and logically, better than both her parents. Heather addressed the key points raised by lawyer Hugh, one by one, explaining the relationship between the company and the project, the cause of the fire, the compensation negotiations with the injured and deceased, and the focus of the police investigation. She also specifically mentioned that the police had already approached Alistair, but he was hiding from them, claiming to be on a business trip. After listening to all this, lawyer Hugh carefully analyzed the situation and then suggested, "Mr. Croft, I recommend you turn yourself in. The incident just happened, and the police are looking for you to take mandatory measures. By hiding like this, you will only increase your sentence when the time comes." Eleanor, who had been silent, suddenly shouted hysterically, "No way! What kind of lawyer are you? How can you let us send Alistair to the police station? Are you helping him or harming him?" Son. Heather hugged her mother and comforted her. "It's okay, Mom. It's okay. We will solve it. Lawyer Hugh is doing this for our own good." Alistair said, embarrassedly, "My wife has some depression. Please don't mind her." Heather said, "Dad, I agree with lawyer Hugh. You should turn yourself in and try to come out early. Since it has happened, don't hide. I believe lawyer Hugh won't hurt you." Alistair finally took lawyer Hugh's advice. Before turning himself in, he made arrangements for the company's related matters. Although he managed the entire building materials company, he was not a shareholder. The shares were held by his wife, Eleanor, 51, and his daughter, Heather, 49. He arranged for several close vice presidents to take over the company's subsequent affairs. After taking care of everything, Alistair, accompanied by lawyer Hugh, went to the police station to surrender. Due to the high level of attention paid to safety accidents, the state officials in charge of safety personally took charge and set up an investigation team to handle the accident. After Alistair surrendered, he was unable to apply for bail and was detained in the detention center. From the time Alistair surrendered to his sentencing, his wife, Eleanor, appeared only once with Heather. As immediate family members, they signed the documents to appoint a defense lawyer. Apart from that, whether it was going to the procurator at the court or the detention center for meetings, Heather accompanied her father throughout. Once, lawyer Hugh went to the factory to pick up Heather to discuss the case at the procuratorate. As he approached the office, he saw a tall, burly man about 185 meters tall, arguing with Heather and Eleanor. Lawyer Hugh didn't rush in. He listened at the door for a while, feeling that this person was up to no good. He casually turned on the recorder he carried with him. He heard the man say, "Let me tell you, that lawyer is useless. We need connections for my brother-in-law's case. I have found Secretary Gordon of the Municipal, Political, and Legal Committee, and he promised to help us get him out. Give me 1 million, and I will handle it. Otherwise, if he is really convicted, you are on your own." Eleanor didn't speak, but just cried. Heather said, "How much money had you swindled from our family all these years?" "Another 1 million. Is it enough for you gambling? Lawyer Hugh has been running around for us responsibly, and he only charged half the legal fees. Not only are you not helping, but you're also taking advantage of this situation to cheat us out of money, not even sparing your own relatives. How can I have an uncle like you? The man's Ellen's cousin Ronald. Enraged by Heather's words, he grabbed her by the collar, about to hit her. Lawyer Hugh rushed in and shouted, "What are you doing? Stop it." Ronald glanced at Lawyer Hugh and cursed. "This is our family matter. Mind your own business." Lawyer Hugh waved his recorder and shouted, "Who were you going to bribe just now?" "I recorded it all." "Do you need to call the police?" "Go and explain it to them yourself." Ronald reached out to grab the recorder. Lawyer Hugh was a scout in the army. Although he had been discharged for a long time, his muscle memory was still there. He grabbed Ronald's wrist, slammed him against the wall, and said to Heather, "Call the police." "None." Ronald cried out in pain. I'm going. "Let me go first. You're going to break my hand." Lawyer Hugh let go. Ronald turned and walked towards the door, shouting as he left, "Just you wait. I'll get someone to kill you." Lawyer Hugh asked Heather, "Are you okay? Call the police if you encounter such hooligans in the future." Kiss. Heather wiped her tears and said, "I'm okay, Uncle Hugh. Let's go to the procuratorate." Lawyer Hugh remembered it clearly, and that was the first time Heather called him Uncle. Alistair was eventually sentenced to 4 years and 6 months in prison. On December 20, 1999, the first day after McKelney's return to China, Lawyer Hugh was in his office, rushing to finish the defense statement for a criminal case. He didn't leave the office until 9 o'clock in the evening. As he walked out of the office, he saw a dark figure curled up by the elevator, motionless. He didn't realize it was Heather until he got closer. Heather had been waiting for him there. Upon seeing Lawyer Hugh, Heather knelt down and said, "Uncle Hugh, I don't know what to do." She choked up before finishing the sentence. Lawyer Hugh took her to his office and let her sit on the sofa, asking what happened. "Tell me." Heather burst into tears and sobbed, "My mom passed away." 7. A week before Lawyer Hugh ran into Heather again. Alistair's wife, Heather's mother, Eleanor, walked out of the house, alone at 1 o'clock in the morning, climbed up an office building in the city center, pried open the protective net on the top floor, and jumped. After all, Lawyer Hugh was only Alistair's former defense lawyer. When encountering such a thing, he naturally had to ask about the child's family first. He asked, "Are there any elders in your family who can handle this? I'll take you to them." With a hint of viciousness in her eyes, Heather said hatefully, "I won't look for them. They are not human. They're a group of vampires, blood-sucking demons." Lawyer Hugh's heart softened. As a lawyer, the best option in this situation was to avoid it. There was no client, and the parties involved couldn't afford the legal fees. This kind of cheap sense of justice would only ruin a lawyer's career. But his heart softened. He felt sorry for Heather and felt that Alistair didn't deserve it. He wanted to do something for the father and daughter, even if he didn't make any money, even if there were risks. He wanted to give it a try. Lawyer Hugh took Heather to Pizza Hut downstairs, bought her something to eat, and after careful questioning, finally understood what had happened. He really didn't expect that there were such vicious people in this world. He really didn't expect that there were such vicious people in this world. Heather's family was really ruined by that Ronald. After Alistair went to prison, a group of relatives from Eleanor's hometown came. The leader was Eleanor's uncle Ronald's father. Eleanor's father had passed away early. She had been raised by her mother alone. Her mother was a farmer and made a living by farming a small piece of land. Before Eleanor married Alistair, she and her mother had been bullied by her father's family. After the marriage, their family's financial situation improved, and the relatives' attitude towards them gradually changed. But this change was also based on the premise of taking advantage of them. Some time ago, Eleanor's mother passed away due to illness. Eleanor basically cut off contact with her relatives in her hometown and sent away several relatives from the factory, including Ronald. Ronald was extremely resentful of Eleanor. He used to be able to make some extra money through various channels in the factory, but now that he was kicked out, his income was cut off. Looking at Alistair's assets of over $100 million, Ronald's eyes turned red. He thought of an older brother he knew. This person was well connected and experienced, and most importantly, he seemed to be short of money. After consulting with his brother, Ronald returned to his hometown and instigated a group of relatives to force Eleanor to hold a family meeting. Several uncles in the family proposed that Eleanor, as a woman, couldn't keep such a large family business. They proposed to let Ronald be the general manager and be responsible for the overall management, while Eleanor, as a woman, would just be the chairman in name and wouldn't need to worry about company affairs. Eleanor couldn't resist the pressure from her relatives. At the same time, as a housewife, she had never managed a company before, so she reluctantly agreed. However, she proposed that, while Ronald could be the general manager, the vice presidents appointed by Alistair could not be replaced. Initially, Ronald agreed to this condition, and the company continued to operate normally. Later, as Heather was about to take the college entrance exam, Eleanor went home to concentrate on taking care of Heather's studies and didn't pay much attention to the company. However, Ronald began to add many management positions to the company, arranging his father, uncles, sister, brother-in-law, and other relatives into the company, sidelining the original vice presidents and financial manager. Heather got good grades and was admitted to a key university's finance major. After Heather went to college, Ronald went even further. He repeatedly incited his relatives to cause trouble, proposing that since the whole family was managing the company, the whole family should have equity, forcing Eleanor to divide the equity equally among the relatives. Of course, Eleanor disagreed, so Ronald began to transfer money out of the company and didn't record many payments. When Eleanor discovered this and confronted him, Ronald, together with several relatives, drove her out of the office and threatened, "The company belongs to our Croft family, not you alone. Eleanor, if you don't care about our family ties again, we will beat you every time we see you. When you go back home, we will tear down your old house and dig your mother's grave out of the cemetery." Helpless Eleanor could only seek legal counsel and try to resolve the issue through legal channels. Based on the legal advice she received, she decided to hold a board meeting, replace all the company's senior executives, and at the same time conduct a company liquidation using legal channels to investigate all the accounts. Company liquidation required the consent of more than 70 of the shareholders, and there were only 2 shareholders in the company, Heather 49 and Eleanor 51. The shareholders' meeting resolution required the signatures of both of them. Eleanor had entrusted a lawyer to draft the shareholders' meeting resolution and sent it to Heather by email. Just as Heather was about to sign and send it back, she heard the news of her mother's suicide. When Heather rushed back to Ashton City overnight, after hearing the bad news, her mother's body had already been cremated. She didn't even get to see her one last time. After listening to Heather's story, Lawyer Hugh was furious. This was murder. This was murder. What was even more frightening was that they had already attacked Eleanor. Would Heather be the next? After Heather finished telling her story, she suddenly knelt down to Lawyer Hugh and said, "Uncle Hugh, I don't trust anyone anymore. I only trust you. I want to sue them. I want justice for my mother, but I have no money. Uncle Hugh, I can't afford the legal fees, nor the litigation costs." Lawyer Hugh helped Heather up. He understood her grief and helplessness very well. He had the ability to fight the lawsuit for her at the time. The law firm had a full risk agency model that would allow Heather to complete the lawsuit without spending a penny. But Lawyer Hugh didn't do that. He thought of the question. Heather's mother was gone. Her father was in prison, and she was currently in a state of no guardian. If something happened to her, who else could stand up for her? Thinking in her shoes, if Heather were his daughter, what choice would he make? Of course it was to let her get away from all this first. Ronald and the others had gone mad. They had tasted the sweetness of their actions. For hundreds of millions of dollars in assets, they would do crazy things again. And Heather, in the eyes of these so-called relatives, was nothing more than a lamb to be slaughtered. Therefore, Lawyer, who rarely met his emotions overcome his reason in his professional career, he made a decision on behalf of Heather's parents. He said to Heather, "If you trust me, then listen to me. Drop out of school, and I will help you study abroad. Of course, I will also ask for your father's opinion. Let your father handle the lawsuit himself." The next day, Lawyer Hugh went to the prison to see Alistair with Heather's power of attorney. Lawyer Hugh hated to tell his clients bad news. No matter whether it was related to him or not, he would feel guilty. In fact, many lawyers had the same mentality. When they lost a case, even if it wasn't their fault, they were reluctant to face the client. But this time he went. Lawyer Hugh felt that a certain cold place deep down in his heart was ignited by the sadness and helplessness in Heather's eyes. He had never been so angry and impulsive in his life. You can't always be cautious in life. Sometimes you have to be passionate when it's time to be passionate. At that moment, Lawyer Hugh felt like he was going to do something, even if it meant facing a million enemies alone. When he saw Alistair, Lawyer Hugh talked for a long time and in great detail. During the process, Alistair didn't say a word. His hands cuffed to the iron bench were clenched into fists. After Lawyer Hugh finished speaking, Alistair slowly lowered his head and began to sob softly, cried out loud. The cries grew louder and louder, gradually turning into wails, so much so that the prison guards thought something was wrong and came in to check. They reminded Lawyer Hugh to try to help control the prisoner's emotions. After Alistair finished crying and calmed down, he wiped his tears and said to Lawyer Hugh, You are right. Please help me with Heather. Let her study abroad. I bought a shopping coaster, which should be worth over $1 million. It was signed in Heather's name because the property certificate hasn't been issued yet, so I didn't tell her. I wanted to surprise her when she graduates from college, but it seems unnecessary now. Please help me return the house or sell it. Send Heather away first, and the rest will be your legal fees. I'll be out in 2 years, and I'll handle these things myself. Lawyer Hugh obtained Alistair's consent and found a reliable agency to help Heather with the procedures to study in New Zealand. Because it was a pre-university course, the process was very fast. The house was returned, and a small amount of liquidated damages was paid. Lawyer Hugh didn't charge any legal fees, and all the money was transferred to Heather. Although Alistair had been running the company for so many years, most of the cash was in the company's account for turnover, and he didn't keep much for himself. But this money was basically enough. Next, it was just a matter of waiting for Alistair to be released from prison. After completing all the procedures, Alistair had less than half a year left of his sentence. At this time, something else happened that caught Lawyer Hugh off guard. The 51 of the company's shares held by Eleanor had been changed at the Administration for Industry and Commerce and were now held by 7 people, including Ronald and his relatives. Among them, Ronald held 30 and the others shared 21. Lawyer Hugh thought these people were simply audacious. According to the inheritance law, these shares should be inherited by Eleanor's parents, children, and spouse. How did they change the share registration? After checking the industrial and commercial archives, he found that the basis for the registration change was a share transfer agreement and a notary certificate. The notary certificate had Eleanor's signature and fingerprints, and the transfer was Ronald. The date of issuance of this notary certificate was actually before Eleanor's suicide. This was obviously done under duress, and Eleanor most likely chose to end her life because she was forced to notarize but there was still a chance. Eleanor's shares were jointly owned by the couple, and it was a gratuitous transfer. As long as Alistair was released from prison, there was a chance to confirm the invalidity of the share transfer through litigation. Everything depended on Alistair. One day in November 2001, Lawyer Hugh, who had just finished a court session, received a call from the resident procuratorate office of the prison. The prosecutor told him 2 things on the phone. First, Alistair was suspected of a new crime and would be subject to investigation. Second, Alistair wanted to see him. Alistair was about to be released. How could he be involved in another crime? After meeting with Alistair, according to legal procedures, and communicating with relevant departments of the prison, he finally understood the situation. Someone had reported Alistair to the Municipal Economic Crime Investigation Team on suspicion of embezzlement and tax evasion. It wasn't until a month later that Lawyer Hugh saw the case file at the procuratorate. The facts of the case were clear. During his time running the company, more than $30 million in payment for goods had not been deposited into the company's account, but directly into Alistair's personal account. In fact, almost all private enterprises had this kind of situation. The company belonged to the boss. When the business was busy, in order to facilitate the flow of funds, the boss would use his personal card for turnover, and then adjust the accounts before the end of the year for tax filing. The taxes that should be paid would be paid, and the invoices that should be made up would be made up. However, Alistair was in trouble. These accounts, which should have been settled by the accountant, had not been settled in time because Ronald had replaced the accountant. Now they became evidence for Ronald to frame Alistair. There is the company's seal on the reporting materials, as well as a resolution of the shareholders' meeting. Passenger Wushi of the shareholders agreed to report the case, which was more than half of the company's total shares. And Alistair was now legally just an ordinary person who had served as chairman of the board. Lawyer Hugh met with Alistair again and analyzed the specific circumstances of the case, telling him truthfully that the case was very unfavorable to him. Alistair said, "I already know. They have sent me messages through various channels, many times, saying that as long as I give up the 51 of the shares that belong to me and my wife, and let Heather transfer her 49 to them, they will drop the lawsuit." Economic crimes were somewhat different from other crimes. They were generally aimed at recovering stolen money. Before formally filing a case, the public security organs usually gave the criminal suspect and the informant an opportunity to reconcile. If the two parties reached a settlement, the case could usually be dropped without investigation. Lawyer Yu said, "Although I will ultimately respect your opinion, I don't think you should back down. These people are vicious and have no bottom line. If you give them an inch, they will take a mile. If you give them a mile, they will ask for everything. They are like wolves that can never be satisfied. Judah, I suggest you fight to the death. I can waive the legal fees. I can't stand to see these beasts in human skin living so comfortably. I believe in karma, and these people should be punished." Alistair said, "I will not back down this time, not even a single step. I have nothing left to lose. They have already trampled me into the mud. I can't smear myself with more dirt." After returning from the prison, Lawyer Hugh immediately went to the Economic Crime Investigation team and explained the situation to the investigating police officer. He made it clear that his client was not willing to reconcile. The investigating police officer also felt that there was something wrong with the case. After chatting with Lawyer Hugh for a long time, he generally understood the cause and effect of the matter. Finally, he said to Lawyer Hugh, "From a personal point of view, I sympathize with Alistair, and I will also ask my colleagues in the criminal police team to help investigate to see if there is anything suspicious about the suicide of his wife. But it has been too long, and there is probably no result. As for this case, after all, the fact of embezzlement does exist. If the shares were their own, and they didn't sue, there would be no embezzlement. You are a lawyer, you understand. We will not file a case like this on our own initiative. But now that the resolution of the company's shareholders' meeting clearly requires an investigation, it is difficult for us to handle it, and it is very likely that it will still be transferred for review and prosecution." Lawyer Hugh agreed with the police's attitude. Sympathy was one thing, but the law was the law. In the end, the procurator still prosecuted the case. The amount of more than $30 million was particularly huge. But Lawyer Hugh still found a way to help Alistair find out that most of the funds were used to pay the company's accounts payable, and only more than $3 million could not be accounted for. As for the tax evasion issue, because it belonged to corporate crime, Ronald was afraid of lifting a rock, only to drop it on his own feet. He secretly made up the tax owed, and because it was his first offense, the procurator did not prosecute him. Finally, the court sentenced Alistair to 5 years in prison to be executed concurrently with the remaining sentence. After careful consideration, lawyer Hugh told Heather, who was far away in New Zealand, the news and apologized. Heather was silent for a long time on the phone, and then said, calmly, "Uncle, I understand. I will handle it myself." At the end of December 1989, when people in the Northern Hemisphere ushered in the new millennium, in the cold wind, Dunedin, located on the South Island of New Zealand, in the Southern Hemisphere, was in the warm summer. In the evening, Charlie was driving a modified ETR at breakneck speed along the coastal road. Daniel in the passenger seat shouted, "Charlie, slow down. Those Indian kids are no match for you." A Lamborghini sped past from the left. Charlie shouted, "That guy Jay, he's just got a good car. I'll have to get a Mercy to a Lego myself sometime." Behind them, several supercars were chasing them madly, and they were about to catch up with the DTR. Charlie smiled wickedly and said, "Hold on, I'm going to use my secret weapon." As he spoke, he reached out and pressed the nitrous oxide switch on the dashboard. The GTR shot out like an arrow, leaving the others in the dust. By the beach, a group of young people was swaying to the loud music, beers in hand. A GTR and a Lamborghini were parked side by side, and a Mercedes-Benz Golf was parked behind the two supercars. 5 young people gathered around the 3 cars, drinking beer and celebrating. Joey and Irene were a couple driving the Lamborghini. Charlie drove the GTR, and Daniel was his co-driver. There were also 2 other young people, one named Ethan, driving the Mercedes. All 5 young people were international students from mainland China, from wealthy families. They studied at language schools in New Zealand. They didn't like to study and couldn't get into university, so they were sent by their parents to a foreign country, thousands of miles away. These 5 people all liked luxury cars and racing. They had made a bet with a few rich. As a result, they won effortlessly. Ethan looked at the beer in his hand and said, "This beer is not strong enough. I still have a case of Malky. Why don't we?" "Agreed. We have to finish it." The 5 of them threw away the beer in their hands, got in the car, and went straight to the apartment they rented. Ethan brought the liquor and set up a barbecue by the sea. They drank and chatted, bragging. They were half drunk when they saw 7 or 8 Maori people walking towards them in the distance. The Maori were the indigenous people of New Zealand. Many Maori people's lives basically consisted of drinking, taking drugs, and robbing. Even the government often had no way to deal with them. It was late at night, and the group of Maori who appeared at this time were most likely here to rob. Charlie, who was over 19 meters tall and muscular, looked gentle, but was actually a tough guy. He pulled out the Jungle King tactical knife from his waist and said, "Guys, what are you afraid of? Let's do them. Let's do them." Joey, who was a little older and calmer, said, "Don't be impulsive. Give them some money and send them away." Ethan's English was better. He shouted to those people from afar, "Hey, guys, we don't want any trouble. What's up?" The leading Maori man sneered and said, "I heard you won a lot of money today." The other Maori men coldly drew their daggers. Daniel, who was sharp-eyed, saw the daggers and shouted in Chinese, "Oh my God, these guys want to rob and kill us. Run." These people knew the security situation here very well. Without any hesitation, they ran towards the street, with street lights nearby. 7 or 8 Maori were chasing them like crazy. It seemed that those Indian guys had lost their minds and had paid these Maori to cause trouble. Run first. The 5 of them turned left and right and turned into a dead end. We're done for. Daniel complained to Charlie, who was leading the way. Why didn't you look at the road? We're trapped now. Charlie drew out his jungle cane and said fiercely, let's do it. Killing 1 is enough. Killing 2 is a profit. Several million men blocked the alley and slowed down, with fierce looks in their eyes. It was then that everyone noticed that, in the middle of the 2 groups, on the side of the road, in the alley, a girl was guarding a pile of burning paper money, slowly putting the paper money into the fire, one by one. The girl was obviously Chinese. Seeing the situation in front of her, she didn't panic. She just stood up and asked 5 young people who were ready to fight to the death, Chinese. Ethan said, isn't it obvious? The girl asked, Hong Kong, Taiwan. Charlie was angry and said, I'm from mainland China. The girl hummed softly, then took out 2 Browning pistols from her waist bag. According to Charlie's later recollection, the scene at that time was extremely strange. He seemed to have seen Lara from Tomb Raider. Yes, that's what it felt like. Then the girl opened fire, firing with both hands at the same time. 2 Maori men were shot and fell to the ground instantly, both hit in the leg. The other Maori men saw that the other party had guns and ran away, disappearing in an instant. However, the girl seemed to be venting. She didn't stop at all. She fired all the bullets from the 2 guns in one go, then took out the magazines from her waist bag, ready to reload. According to Ethan, everyone was scared to death at that time. Ethan and Joey rushed to hug the girl. Charlie grabbed the gun in her hand and comforted her. It's okay, they ran away. The sound of police sirens could be heard in the distance. Irene shook her mobile phone in her hand and said, embarrassedly, I called the police. Charlie reached out to the girl and said, dude, you're amazing. Thanks. My name is Charlie. We're friends from now on. The girl had calmed down. She shook his hand and said, my name is Heather. I remember now. We are classmates, but you guys don't go to class very often. At the police station, the 6 young people had given their statements and were locked up in a detention room. A middle-aged Chinese lawyer was negotiating with the police. Except for Heather, everyone else was released on bail. Joey said to the lawyer, Lawyer Giro, the one inside is our classmate. If it weren't for her today, the 5 of us would be finished. You have to get her out no matter what. We don't care how much the bail is. The lawyer said she is more troublesome. She was carrying a gun without a license, which is likely to lead to jail time. But I will do my best to find a way. Don't worry. Don't worry. Charlie said, this girl is loyal. She's all right. Ethan also said we must get her out. As long as it's about money, it's not a problem. The lawyer said, you guys go back first and let your parents know that you are safe. Leave the rest to me. That day was the anniversary of Eleanor's death. Heather, according to the customs of her hometown, found a small tally and burned paper money for her mother. However, she didn't know whether the paper money burned in New Zealand could be delivered to her mother's hands in the underworld. Since coming to New Zealand, Heather had been thinking about how to avenge her mother. She practiced pistol shooting at the shooting club every day and bought 2 pistols and more than 200 rounds of ammunition through underground channels. Shooting and injuring people this time wasn't a big deal. It could basically be considered self-defense. But illegal possession of a gun was a problem. However, those international students were quite capable. In less than 3 days, they found a way to bail her out. The bail was an astronomical sum, paid by that Joey. When she left the police station, she saw 3 cars and 5 people waiting for her at the door. Ethan patted her on the shoulder and said, "Get in my car. Let's go celebrate your release." Charlie's father had bought a villa near the school. Daniel invited 2 Chinese chefs to cook a big meal: lobster, king crab, and multi liquor. The small group of 5 Chinese international students officially accepted Heather as one of their own. Joey raised his glass and toasted Heather. "You are a little older than us. From today onwards, you are our big sister. The 5 of us owe you our lives. Tell us what your wish is, and we will try our best to help you realize it." Heather clinked glasses with them and drank it all in one gulp. She told them the story of her family from beginning to end. After listening to her story, the young people were silent for a long time. Charlie said, "Sis, what do you want to do?" "My family runs an international security company. I can arrange for someone to help you take care of them." Irene said, "That's mainland China. Do you think it's Afghanistan?" Heather said, "I want to make money first, to make myself strong, and then I will go back and seek justice for my mother within the framework of the law." Ethan said, "That's easy. Why don't we set up a trading company together? Joey, your family is in the international trade business in Hong Kong, right? Give us a line. I think red wine is good. We'll pool the start-up capital, and Joey can ask his old man for the business. It's not a problem to make billions of dollars a year." Daniel said, "That's reliable. Leave the logistics to me. My family is in this business." Irene said, "You guys are responsible for doing business. My family runs a law firm. Let me ask my brother to find an expert to look at your case and come up with a plan for you." Joey said, "We had enough fun. It's time to do something serious. This is a good proposal. Let's have a toast. From today onwards, we are partners." A week later, New Zealand Real International Trade Co. Limited was formally established. Heather was the chairman and general manager. Irene was the supervisor, and all 6 were shareholders. Joey got the import business of New Zealand and Australian wines from his family business. The families of the 5 young people injected a large amount of capital, and Rushi International quickly became a rising star in the New Zealand foreign trade industry, with its business developing rapidly. In 2001, Rushi International's annual turnover had exceeded $10 billion, and it had set up branches in Sydney, Shenzhen, and Shanghai. Heather suspended her studies and devoted herself to the company's business, quickly growing into an outstanding entrepreneur. At the end of November, Heather, who was in Shanghai for a foreign trade order fair, received a call from lawyer Hugh. She listened quietly to his story, trying hard to control her emotions, and only said calmly, "Uncle, I understand. I will handle it myself." After hanging up the phone, she called Eileen Irene, we can start that plan. In 2003, after the SARS epidemic, China's real estate industry entered a period of crazy growth. Relying on the business foundation laid by Alistair, Ronald had been doing well in the past few years, but relying solely on building materials, processing and sales, and small-scale decoration projects could no longer satisfy his appetite. The entire company now had assets of about $150 million. He not only had to manage production operations and social relations, but also had to deal with a group of greedy relatives. Ronald regretted dividing the shares to those relatives. He felt that he didn't need those relatives to deal with orphans and widows. It would be enough to find a few gangsters in society, and the cost would not be high. Ronald felt that his life was very tiring. On the surface, he was the chairman and general manager of the company, with an annual income of tens of millions of dollars. But apart from those relatives, most of the money was given to his behind-the-scenes boss. He knew what he was capable of. With his limited abilities, how could he have made such a sophisticated plan to pocket the entire company? How could he have followed up and made Alistair stay in prison for another 5 years? However, his boss had a big appetite. He gave him 60 of the money he earned every year. A few days ago, Ronald mentioned to this boss his idea of engaging in real estate, and the other party immediately arranged a partner for him. According to the conditions proposed by that partner, they would take all the meat, leaving him only a little soup, and he had to contribute the most money. Ronald felt that his boss was a little unreliable. He had to find a new partner and get rid of this Becker's control as soon as possible. It was Ronald's luck that last week, when he was drinking with several friends in the business world, a boss surnamed Schmidt told him about an opportunity. A listed company was looking for local real estate project partners, and the conditions were very favorable. They only needed to obtain the land through bidding auction and listing, and the other party would acquire the land at a premium. At the same time, they would also reserve a portion of the shares in the real estate development project for the landholder. Most importantly, this boss Schmidt had a way to get the land. However, a deposit had to be paid for the land transfer. A 40% of the land transfer fee had to be paid after winning the bid. Boss Schmidt couldn't raise this money, so he had to transfer this opportunity to the capable Ronald. The current price of land in the new district of Ashton City was $12 million per acre. To develop a community of 200 acres, the land transfer fee was $240 million. The initial land transfer fee required $96 million. However, the housing prices in Ashton City had now risen to $5,000 per square meter. With a floor area ratio of 3:0, the saleable construction area was 400,000 square meters, and the sales amount could reach $2 billion. The land floor price was only $600, and the construction cost was at most $2,000, plus the premium of the commercial area. The pre-tax profit of the project was $1 billion. The listed company's cooperation plan was to hold a 51% stake, and they would provide all the development funds, which would be withdrawn from the profits first. The remaining 49% belonged to the cooperating party. In other words, Ronald only needed to invest $100 million, and after the development was completed, he could make a net profit of $400 to $500 million. Ronald was tempted by Boss Schmidt's words and asked him how much he wanted. Boss Schmidt was not greedy and wanted 10% of all profits. Ronald felt that he could get the land, and it was worth the price. The two hit it off and made an appointment to meet the investors in Miami. A week later, Ronald and Boss Schmidt arrived in Miami. Boss Schmidt contacted someone and learned that the leader in charge of meeting them was still on a business trip in New York. They waited for another day before making an appointment. Ronald wanted to invite them to dinner, but they refused directly, saying that they were very busy and that they should talk in the office if they wanted to talk. They also sent Boss Schmidt an address via text message. The address was a graded show office building in a high-tech zone in Miami. Ronald and Boss Schmidt arrived on time. The secretary was the company's office occupied an entire floor, more than 2,000 square meters, with luxurious decoration. There were gyms, restaurants, tourism, and everything you could think of. The furniture was all brand new. However, there were few people. The secretary explained that the company used to be in New York, and this office was newly purchased and decorated. Many colleagues were still in New York, and it would be about a month before this office officially opened. After walking around the company office, they were finally taken by the secretary to it. The conference room was about 100 square meters, with a circle of Chinese-style sofas, and many photos hung on the wall, all of the same young man, with various government officials and business leaders. Ronald pointed to the photo and asked the secretary, "Who is this?" The secretary said, "This is Mr. Joey, the chairman of our company." Ronald took a closer look. This Mr. Joey even had a photo with a certain leader. It was incredible. He muttered to himself, "Mr. Joey is too young." The secretary said, "You can easily find out about Chairman Joey's family. Their family has a tradition of working in state-owned enterprises before officially entering the family business. You also know the actual controlling shareholder of this company. Chairman Joey's family and the state-owned enterprise jointly established our company. It is the second largest shareholder and specializes in real estate project investment." After waiting for about half an hour, Chairman Joey's assistant came in and greeted them. "Sorry, Chairman, Joey's guest just left. Let's go to the VIP conference room to talk. Please follow me." Ronald and Boss Schmidt followed Chairman Joey's assistant into a slightly smaller conference room. A young man in a suit walked over and shook hands with them. The assistant handed over business cards, and they all took their seats. The young man introduced himself. "Hello, I'm Joey, chairman of the company. I had a client just now, so I kept you waiting." After exchanging a few pleasantries, Joey said, "I have a very full schedule today, so let's get straight to the point. My secretary has already sorted out your information and studied it with me. The land in Ashton City is no problem. We will invest if the winning bid per acre is no more than $1-2 million US. However, there is one condition. You are locals and must get the land first. As far as I know, according to your policy, the land transfer fee can be paid in 3 installments, 40 for the first installment and 30 for the next 2 installments. It can be paid off before applying for the pre-sale permit. After the first installment of the land transfer fee is paid, construction can begin. Our source of funds is state-owned enterprises. An investment must pass risk control. The condition for risk control is that the first installment of the land transfer fee is paid, the land contract is signed, and the project has started construction. The scope of investment includes the land transfer fee that has been paid, the fees and project funds that have been paid, and all subsequent investments. In other words, we will return the money you have already invested to you. You will hold 49 of the shares with equal rights and obligations. However, all our investments will be withdrawn first. These are the conditions, and there is no room for negotiation. State-owned enterprises are rigid in their work, but they follow the rules. You will not lose a penny of what you deserve. In addition, we can sign a framework agreement first. When you meet our requirements and the project starts, we will sign a formal contract. Joey said all the conditions in one breath, and then symbolically asked Ronald for his opinion. Ronald wanted to further his relationship with Joey, but after all, he was not well educated and not a real estate professional. He couldn't get to the point after talking for a long time. Joey obviously showed impatience, interrupted him, and said, "I have another meeting. In this case, if you have anything else to discuss, please contact my assistant. It is best to have written materials. Our state-owned enterprises attach great importance to this. I'm sorry, I have to go first. By the way, I arranged for the driver to take you back." After that, he said goodbye and left. Ronald wanted to say a few more words, but the young chairman Joey was too imposing, and he couldn't get a word in edgewise. He could only stand up and see him off respectfully. Then, the secretary took them directly to the underground parking lot by a dedicated elevator. The driver had already started the car and was waiting for them. The car was a silver gray Rolls-Royce Phantom with dual US and Canadian license plates. Ronald had never been in a Rolls-Royce in his life. He thought, this young Joey was really unfathomable. It seemed that this project was reliable. Ronald and Boss Schmidt stayed in Miami for a few more days. Young Joey arranged for his driver to accompany them all the way in the Rolls-Royce Phantom. Food and accommodation were arranged by the driver. After learning their return time, the driver also booked their return tickets, all in first class. But the young chairman Joey never showed up again. The development zone at Ashton City had developed rapidly in recent years. It was said that the municipal government would also move here. Schools and hospitals had already taken the lead. The branch of the state hospital and the branch of Ashton Grammar School had already started land acquisition and construction and were expected to be put into use within 2 years. Boss Schmidt took Ronald to meet the leaders of the Ashton City Land and Resources Bureau. After several rounds of communication, they basically agreed to transfer a piece of land 500 meters away from the Ashton Grammar School branch. The land area was 201 acres, and the baseline price was $1.02 million per acre. The owner of this land was a logistics enterprise called Joey Express. The land was used for warehousing. Some warehouses had been built on the ground. With the help of Boss Schmidt, the chairman of Joey Express, and Ronald reached an agreement. The expropriation compensation should normally be more than $70 million, and they agreed to $19 million. However, they verbally agreed to use existing houses for offset after the property construction was completed, and interest would be calculated during this period. The two parties cooperated to increase the assessed value of the original buildings to $150 million. If other people bid, they would have to compensate at this price. This method was used to lock the land. All the plans were planned by Boss Schmidt. Judging from the current situation, they had successfully secured the land. The only remaining problem was the first payment of the land transfer fee. The land transfer fee plus other fees was about $100 million. Ronald had all the land, factories, and equipment of the company assessed together, which was only a little over $100 million. Fortunately, Boss Schmidt helped him do some work in the assessment company. Coupled with Ronald's own real estate, the final assessed value was barely $150 million. With a 60 mortgage loan, he could borrow $90 million. With some of his own cash and loans, he could basically make it. According to his agreement with Jerry, as long as the land was acquired and construction could proceed normally, all this money would be returned to him immediately, and there was basically no risk. But there was a problem with the loan. Although there were no policies restricting real estate loans at that time, it was not allowed to take out a loan to buy land. It was necessary to fabricate a project, which was easy to do. But in addition to this, the bank also required guarantees from all shareholders. Among the company's shareholders, he held 30, and a group of relatives held 21. These were all easy to deal with. But Heather still held 49, and she was abroad and couldn't be contacted. Without Heather's signature, the loan couldn't be approved. Ronald had no choice but to discuss it with Boss Schmidt. Boss Schmidt thought about it and said that the bank's requirement for shareholder signature guarantee was just a procedure. They didn't know Heather and only looked at the ID card. As for how to deal with it, Ronald would have to find a way himself. Ronald understood. He asked his behind-the-scenes boss to say hello to the bank leaders, and then found a distant relative who was similar in age and appearance to Heather. He gave her $10,000 as a reward and had a fake ID card made for her. He took her to the bank to go through the procedures. In 2003, the second-generation ID cards had not yet been popularized. Moreover, the bank had been greeted in advance. This distant relative actually fooled them with a fake ID card. The loan was issued on time. The land was successfully acquired through bidding, auction, and listing, and Ronald and Boss Schmidt also signed a framework agreement with Joey's company. Ronald was already dreaming of becoming a real estate tycoon. Just when everything seemed to be going smoothly, Ronald encountered the first hurdle in his real estate development career. According to the contract, the start of the project was a necessary condition to trigger the investment clause. However, after paying the first 40 of the land transfer fee and some preliminary expenses, Ronald had no money left. Without starting construction, he wouldn't get the money. To start construction, he needed more money. What to do? Boss Schmidt put forward a plan at this time to ask state-owned enterprises for financing. He would find the connections. Ronald felt that Boss Schmidt was really his Zhuge Liang. Although Boss Schmidt lacked strength, his connections were really good. Less than a week after Ronald's real estate company signed the land transfer contract with the government boss, Schmidt arranged a meeting with the leader of a certain bureau. The meeting place was a private club in Ashton City. The club was located on the top floor of a newly developed building in city center. The 180 square meter residence only had one private room and only served one table of dishes a day. but the price was high. The leader only brought a very young friend. Together with Ronald and Boss Schmidt, there were 4 people in total. The minimum consumption of the club's private room was $200, excluding drinks. The dishes were fixed and didn't need to be ordered. Seeing that Ronald was asking the waiter how much a table of dishes cost, the leader's friend smiled and leaned over and said, "Don't worry about it. How can we let the leader's friend pay for the meal? She did follow the victims. I have a membership card, and I brought the wine." The 4 of them took their seats. The leader said that state-owned enterprises now had to go through meetings for real estate construction financing, and the process was very troublesome. The friend he brought was named Ethan, a young man who was the son of a large private construction company. He could handle this matter. Ethan said, "I can provide full financing, but there are a few conditions. First, a contract is signed, based on progress payments. The sales proceeds will be used to pay the project funds first. If the payment cannot be made on time, you can offset it with the houses with a 15% discount on the market price. Second, all construction procedures must be legal. Although we are a private enterprise, we have strict risk control and will not do anything illegal. Third, since we are financing the construction as the major shareholder, Mr. Ronald, you need to provide a guarantee, both you and your wife." Ronald said that he would go back and think about it and would give him a reply soon. After the meal, Ronald invited Boss Schmidt to have tea, mainly to discuss the matter. Boss Schmidt helped Ronald analyze the situation. This can be done. First, we are actually just asking Ethan to advance the funds for a while. Once the money from Chairman Joey arrives, all the problems will be solved. Although the price of the offsetting houses he proposed is a bit harsh, it shouldn't come to that. Second, this Ethan is a decent guy. We were the ones asking him for help, but he still paid for the meal. The dinner and drinks tonight cost more than $30,000. Therefore, I think we can sign this contract with him. Ronald had already regarded Boss Schmidt as his personal think tank. Seeing that he had no objection, he also readily agreed. The next day he contacted Ethan and signed an EPC general contracting contract with his construction company on behalf of the newly established real estate company. At the same time, he pledged the shares of his building materials company to Ethan as a guarantee, and his wife also signed a guarantee agreement. The Design Institute under Ethan's construction company had done many real estate projects and completed the overall project design in less than a month. The construction team entered the site and started construction. Ronald contacted Joey, hoping to sign a formal investment agreement. Joey's reply was also very positive. He sent a team to conduct a comprehensive due diligence on the project and told Ronald that the investment agreement had begun the process. State-owned enterprises were slow in their procedures, but reliable. Ronald had no doubt. In his mind, the hundreds of millions of dollars in profit from this project were already in his pocket. Lawyer Hugh hadn't heard from Heather for a long time. He tried to call her, but the number was no longer in service. He tried to contact her by email, and he would often receive a smiley face reply 2 or 3 months later. To his surprise, on Christmas Day 2004, Heather appeared at his doorstep without any warning. Lawyer Hugh had planned to go back to his hometown for Christmas, but his sister, who worked in the military, couldn't go home for the holiday this year due to special reasons. So his parents decided to spend Christmas at his house. On Christmas Eve, while he was preparing Christmas dinner at home, the doorbell rang. Lawyer Wu thought it was the property management, so he went to open the door with an apron on. To his surprise, it was Heather standing at the door. Heather called out, "Uncle," and tears streamed down her face uncontrollably. Lawyer Hugh patted Heather on the shoulder and said, "You're back. It's good to be back. Come and try our roast turkey." Heather brought 2 cases of wine and 2 boxes of cigars, neither of which was too expensive. Lawyer Hugh asked, "Are you okay? How is life abroad? Did you have enough money?" Heather said, "I'm doing well. I'm not short of money. I didn't go to the pre-university course. I started a company with a few friends, selling red wine and Australian beef. Business is good, and I've made some money. Now, we have branches in China." Lawyer Hugh said, "Doing business is fine, but how can you not go to school?" "Ah," Heather said, "it's not urgent. I'll go back to school when I'm done with what I need to do. Uncle Hugh, I'm here to officially appoint you as my lawyer. Will you take this case?" Lawyer Hugh said, "It's not that. I don't want to take it. Your father's case and your family's case are very difficult to fight. I'm not sure I can win." Heather said, "Not now, but soon. I found several top lawyers in Miami to help me make a plan. I want you to implement it personally. I've prepared all the legal fees, and all that is left is your nod." Lawyer Hugh said, "We'll discuss the legal fees later. Let's look at the plan first." Heather took out a bound plan from her backpack and handed it to Lawyer Hugh, saying, "I've been preparing for this day for 10 years, Uncle. I want to make them spit out everything they ate and pay back double what they owe our family. A life for a life, a debt for a debt." Lawyer Hugh found his reading glasses and opened the thick plan to study it. Heather reached out and closed the plan, saying to Lawyer Hugh, "Uncle, keep this plan with you. You can read it slowly tomorrow. Today is Christmas. Let's celebrate first." Lawyer Hugh smiled and said, "Yes, let's celebrate first." In May 2004, 30 days before the deadline for Ronnie's real estate company to pay the second installment of the land transfer fee, the real estate project was in full swing. Buildings 1 to 10 had already reached the ground level, and the remaining projects were still excavating. Joey's contract approval process was still not complete. Ronald felt a little anxious, but Boss Schmidt was very calm. He believed that this was the process of state-owned enterprises, and there was no point in being anxious. This project was the key project of their cooperation this year, and it would not affect the payment of the second installment of the land transfer fee. In any case, he could rest assured about this. Ronald was still a little uneasy and flew to Miami again with Boss Schmidt. This time, they didn't get an appointment with Chairman Joey and only met his secretary, who said the same as Boss Schmidt had guessed. Ronald called Joey and expressed his concerns. Joey said, "What is there to worry about for your small project? Our minimum investment is hundreds of millions of dollars. If Boss Schmidt hadn't contacted our leader, I wouldn't have time to deal with this project. To cooperate, we need trust. If you think I'm doing it too slowly, why don't you just go to our headquarters and talk to our leader. How could Ronald dare to go to the headquarters and find some leader? He could only return dejectedly, looking at the construction site, producing output value every day. Ronald was still a little worried. He discussed with Boss Schmidt whether to slow down the construction site first. Should they continue after the funds were in place? Otherwise, if there was a problem with the funds, what would he use to pay the project funds? Boss, Schmidt said, you are the boss. You have the final say. I support whatever you do. However, just as Ronald was about to notify the construction site to suspend construction, a call came from Joey's secretary telling him that the headquarters leader and the investment department leader would come to the site for research. This was the final hurdle. After the research, they would sign the contract and pay the money. He asked him to be prepared and not to screw up. Ronald asked when they would come. The secretary said that because the leaders were too busy, the exact time could not be determined, but it would be about 10 days. Upon receiving the notice, Ronald immediately asked Boss Schmidt to withdraw the suspension notice and made a special call to Ethan, asking him to work hard these days and show the spirit of the construction site. However, until the deadline for paying the second installment of the land transfer, the so-called leadership inspection team still hadn't come. Joey's phone couldn't be reached, and when asked, the secretary always said he was in a meeting. Ronald was really anxious. Although the government wouldn't immediately take back the land, if there was a real problem with the funds, he would really be in a difficult situation. He had used all his assets as collateral to pay the first installment. Boss Schmidt said that it seemed that he really had to go to the headquarters to communicate. He had a few familiar leaders in New York who could directly contact the headquarters leader. Otherwise, he would go there first and see what was going on. Ronald said that this was also a way. He would give him $100,000 in expenses first, which could be used for treating guests and other expenses. Boss Schmidt was quite loyal and said, "Brother, you underestimate me. I'm a boss after all, and I have a share in this business. You don't need to pay for this. I'll pay first." Ronald felt that Boss Schmidt was really reliable and said gratefully, "The company is in difficulty now. You can advance the money first. I will pay you back as soon as there are sales proceeds." Boss Schmidt booked a ticket to New York. For the first few days, he contacted Ronald every day to tell him about the situation. After a few more days, his phone couldn't be reached. Ronald called Joey again, but his phone couldn't be reached either. There was no other way. He had to fly to Miami to find Joey. But when he arrived at the company, he was told by the secretary that Joey had resigned and was currently on vacation in New Zealand. The new chairman was extremely indifferent to Ronald, saying that the headquarters didn't approve this project, and he didn't agree either. Joey should take care of the trouble he caused himself. Hearing this, Ronald felt as if he had been poured with a basin of cold water in the freezing cold. He trembled with anger and said angrily, "We have a contract. You are breaching the contract." The new chairman said, "Don't come to me about breach of contract. Go to the legal department." The director of the legal department was right next to him. He took over the conversation and said, "Your contract is a framework agreement of intent, which clearly states that the content of the agreement is only the intention of both parties and is not legally binding on both parties. The specific rights and obligations should be negotiated and signed in a separate cooperation agreement. If you think that you can win a lawsuit with such a contract, please feel free to sue. In addition, please note that the agreed jurisdiction in the contract is the Miami Arbitration Commission. Even if you want to file a lawsuit, you have to come to Miami. Our lawyers here are not cheap. Only then did Ronald realize that he had been played. The culprit was most likely Boss Schmidt. But this didn't make sense. What good would it do to play him? Joey hadn't cheated him out of a penny, and had even spent a lot of money on hospitality and air tickets. Last time, he even bought him a first-class ticket. What was his purpose? Boss, he didn't even want the hospitality expenses he gave him. If they were scammers, what was their purpose? The new chairman of the state-owned enterprise didn't get along with Joey. Boss Schmidt didn't handle the matter well, and was embarrassed to answer his call. This must be the case. Ronald actually convinced himself. But convincing himself was useless. The problem still needed to be solved. Without the money for the second installment of the land transfer fee, this project would collapse. He had used all his assets as collateral to pay the first installment. After thinking about it, Ronald decided to go back to his boss, his backer. Although he hadn't consulted him when he was doing this, which made him a little unhappy, he believed that as long as the benefits were sufficient, there would be no overnight hatred. Ronald's boss was still quite capable. He mocked and ridiculed Ronald at the wine table, but still helped him contact a partner. The partner only paid the remaining land transfer fee and wanted to recover his investment first. He wanted 70% of the profits from the real estate development. Ronald knew that he was taking advantage of the situation, but after calculating the figures, he could still earn more than $100 million, so he agreed and made an appointment to sign the contract and pay the money within a week. It seemed that this hurdle had passed. Just as Ronald was about to breathe a sigh of relief, something unexpected happened to the project before the contract was signed. Ronald's real estate company was sued, and Ronald himself was also a defendant. He sued to bear joint and several liability. The plaintiff was Joey Express, the original owner of the land for Ronald's real estate development project. The company demanded that Ronald and his wife, as well as the real estate company, pay them $150 million in compensation and interest according to the expropriation compensation agreement. At the same time, Ronald's real estate company's accounts land use, rights certificate projects under construction, and Ronald's 30% stake in the building materials company were also preserved. Ronald was very surprised after receiving the complaint and the preservation ruling. Hadn't he discussed it with the chairman of Joey Express? $40 million paid with the sales proceeds of the property. Why did they want the money now so much? He called Lo Wang, the chairman of Joey Express, and questioned him about what was going on. Lao Wang said, "I did serve as the chairman of the company before, but I am not a shareholder. I have already jumped to another company now. You should go and ask the current chairman about this matter." Ronald entrusted his lawyer to communicate with the other party's lawyer. The other party's lawyer had a very tough attitude, saying the compensation agreement between us was signed under the supervision of the Land and Resources Bureau, which clearly stated that compensation would be made according to the assessed price. The assessed price is $150 million. As for the $19 million and the later payment method, he mentioned It was only a verbal negotiation between the two parties. You have not paid the second installment of the land transfer fee on time, and there is already a risk of a major breach of contract. We are now filing a lawsuit to protect our company's legitimate rights and interests, which is reasonable and legal. Ronald felt that he had been cheated. The real estate company's accounts were frozen, the projects under construction were sealed, and the next step was likely that the bank would come to collect the loan. This was about to collapse. What to do? Ronald suddenly missed Boss Schmidt a little. If Boss Schmidt was here, he would definitely have an idea. Fortunately, Ethan had always been loyal. After learning that Ronald had been sued, Ethan made a special call and said that he had already known about the matter, so that Ronald could rest assured that he had already boarded the ship and would ensure continued construction until the pre-sale permit was obtained, no matter what. As long as there was no problem with the project, and as long as the partner introduced by his boss could get the funds in place, the project would still be saved. But all this was just Ronald's wishful thinking. After learning that the real estate company's assets had been preserved, the partner decisively withdrew his investment. Although Ethan did not add insult to injury in view of the current situation of the project, he could only suspend construction for the time being. However, he was a decent person after all. He made an agreement with Ronald to let Ronald find a way to solve the problem as soon as possible, and he was ready to resume work at any time. He would first make a final settlement of the funds advanced in the early stage, and when construction could resume, he would follow the agreement. Now, whether Ronald was willing or not, he had to face this lawsuit seriously. The litigation process was long. The first instance was held twice, and it took 4 months for the court to make a judgment. Ronald lost the case. The court ordered the real estate company to pay the plaintiff $150 million in compensation, and Ronald and his wife were jointly and severally liable. Ronald refused to accept the judgment and appealed. 2 months later, the judgment came into effect, upholding the original judgment. Ronald received a second instance judgment and was furious with the lawyer, saying that he had spent more than $1 million in legal fees in the 2 trials. So how could this be the final result? Ronald's lawyer said, "I already told you that this case couldn't be won. It was you who said that you knew the leaders of the court and could definitely win. So I took the case. Now you can't handle it, so you blame me. I'm not taking the blame for this." The two parted on bad terms. Ronald had no choice but to go to his boss. His boss had worked in the political and legal system and was very familiar with the litigation process. He helped Ronald calculate and said, "You need a lawyer with a very strong background to put pressure on the other party and their lawyer to reach a settlement during the execution stage, to make concessions when necessary, and to reduce the loss as much as possible." Therefore, Ronald, according to his boss's recommendation, found another lawyer. This lawyer, surnamed Charles, had resigned from the state high court. Before resigning, he was a judge in the execution bureau. Lawyer Charles met with Ronald and learned about the situation. He said, "This is not difficult. Nowadays, execution is not that easy. I'll say hello to the Intermediate Court Execution Bureau and ask them to force the other party to settle. First, give them a discount, then make an installment plan, and then give them a small down payment and make an execution settlement. This will be over. In short, it can't affect our project development." Hearing Lawyer Charles, Speak confidently. Ronald nodded quickly and said, Yes, yes, that's what I mean. The plaintiff of the case soon applied for compulsory execution. Lawyer Charles was familiar with the judge of the Intermediate Court Execution Bureau and negotiated to conduct an execution mediation, which was scheduled to be held in the meeting room of the Intermediate People's Court Execution Bureau. On the day of the mediation, Ronald and lawyer Charles arrived at the court early and waited in the meeting room. The agreed time was 4:30 p.m. The plaintiff's lawyer walked into the meeting room, almost on time, not a minute late. Ronald saw that the lawyer who came was someone he knew. It was Lawyer Hugh. Lawyer Hugh submitted a new power of attorney to the judge and said the original lawyers in the first and second instances are no longer responsible for the execution agency of this case. From today onwards, I will be responsible for the execution of the case. Ronald smiled and said Lawyer Hugh is an old acquaintance. That's good. It's easy to discuss matters with acquaintances. Lawyer Hugh sneered and said, I'm just a lawyer, speaking for my client. If my client doesn't agree, I can't help you, even if I want to. Let's hear your mediation plan. Lawyer Charles said, Well, the amount of the judgment is $150 million in principal, plus more than $7 million in interest. I would like to propose our payment plan from 3 aspects. First, the interest is waived, and the principal is discounted. As for how much discount, it depends on the applicant's sincerity. If the discount can be negotiated, we will pay it quickly. Second, payment in installments, paid off in 5 years. Third, the down payment should not exceed $2 million. Our funds are tight now. After this period, we can pay more. The judge listened to the plan and said, It seems that the person subject to execution is quite sincere. Lawyer for the applicant, what do you think of this plan? Lawyer Hugh said, I don't think this plan is good. After all, I am the applicant. You might as well listen to my plan. Of course, this plan only represents my client's opinion. Our plan is very simple. We ask the person subject to execution to pay off all principal and interest within 15 days. Otherwise, we will initiate the assessment and auction process. Hearing this plan, Lawyer Charles was immediately anxious. You are not sincere in negotiation. If this is the case, what is there to talk about? Lawyer Hugh said, We didn't plan to talk in the first place. It was you who asked the court to arrange this meeting. Ronald said, If you want to talk like this, then you can go ahead and execute it. I won't let you take a penny. Lawyer Hugh said, Judge, we have a guarantee and a mortgage. Are they trying to transfer their assets? Doing this in front of the judge, isn't it a bit too arrogant? The judge thought for a moment and advised Lawyer Hugh, we still focus on mediation and execution. You don't compromise at all. This attitude is not appropriate. She did follow the victims. Lawyer Hugh smiled and said, Does the law stipulate that I must compromise? If not, then not compromising is my right. The negotiation broke down. Lawyer Hugh left first. Lawyer Charles was still talking to the judge about the case. The judge said, You also know that we can only advise them to settle. If they just don't want to settle, there is nothing I can do as a judge. Coming out of the court, Ronald said to lawyer Charles with some dissatisfaction, "The judge you found doesn't seem to be of any use." Lawyer Charles said it doesn't matter. "If the judge can't handle him, I'll find someone else. I don't believe they won't give anyone face. I'll know this lawyer today. I'll ask the leader of the Judicial Bureau to do his work." Ronald returned home. The more he thought about it, the more he felt something was wrong. Especially the appearance of Lawyer Hugh surprised him very much. He knew that Lawyer Hugh was Alistair's defense lawyer, and the two had a good relationship. Now he was the lawyer for the other party again. Could there be something fishy? Thinking about it carefully, he felt it was impossible. Alistair was still in prison. How could he participate in this matter? A few days later, lawyer Charles called and said that this lawyer was simply unyielding. The leader of the Judicial Bureau called him, but he didn't give him face, saying something like, "Try to revoke my lawyer's license. If you dare, otherwise don't interfere with my case." This was a tough nut to crack. Then Ronald received a notice from the court requesting an assessment of his shares in the building materials company. After consulting a lawyer, Charles' said, "Lawyer, you submitted the application twice, and the court delayed it. As a result, this guy went directly to the president's office, and now even the executor has been replaced." Lawyer Charles also said with some confusion, "How much money did he get for this case? It's just acting as an agent for a case. Is it worth working so hard? He won't have to deal with the Intermediate Court Execution Bureau in the future." What the court sealed for this case was Ronald's shares in the building materials company and the account of the real estate company, and what lawyer Hugh applied for assessment and auction was the shares of the building materials company. Ronald held 30 of the shares in the building materials company, which were valued at $15 million by the court-appointed appraisal. Ronald disagreed and raised an objection. The court asked the appraisal company to adjust the appraisal in response to the objection, and finally determined it to be $16.5 million. Under normal circumstances, the first auction would start at a price within 20 lower than the assessed price. The court entrusted an auction company, and the starting price was set at $15.5 million. Ronald discussed it with his boss and lawyer Charles. The shares of this building materials company were his foundation and absolutely could not be auctioned off by others. Lawyer Charles thought for a moment and proposed a plan. "Your shares only account for 30 in the building materials company. If they are auctioned off by others, you will have no decision-making power. Whether or not to pay dividends is up to the majority shareholder, so it is almost worthless. Currently, only you value these shares because you are the actual controller of the company. The court's rule is 2 auctions, with a price reduction each time. The starting price is $15.5 million. After the first auction fails, it will be reduced to $12 million. After the second auction fails, it will be reduced to more than $9 million. At that time, we will buy it back with a third-party company, and it will still be yours. But you need to prepare about $10 million in funds." Ronald considered it for a moment. The recent payment from the building materials company was more than $10 million, which could be misappropriated first. So he decided to follow lawyer Charles's plan. As expected, no one bid in the first auction, and the 30 stake was passed in. On the day of the failed auction, lawyer Charles communicated with the judge of the Execution Bureau and asked him to lower the price of the second auction a bit. The judge said that lawyer Hugh was making a big fuss, asking him to recuse himself, and he was no longer in charge of this case. However, he could talk to the judge in charge of the case and try to lower the price as much as possible. A few days later, just as Ronald and the others were raising money to participate in the sale after the second auction failed, the judge entrusted by lawyer Charles called and said, "Don't bother, the applicant has applied for debt to equity swap." Lawyer Charles was startled, thinking why things didn't go as he had expected. He asked the judge, shouldn't the second auction begin after the first auction fails? The judge said, there is a judicial interpretation of the Supreme People's Court. If the applicant is willing to swap debt for equity at the price of the first auction, after the first auction fails, it should be allowed. Lawyer Hugh submitted an application and is willing to swap debt for equity at the price of $15.5 million. The collegiate panel has already issued a ruling on the debt to equity swap, and there is nothing I can do. Lawyer Hugh had almost moved to the Intermediate Court Execution Bureau to work recently. For 3 consecutive days, Lawyer Hugh sat in the office of the execution judge, urging him to write the ruling and stamp it. The judge in charge of the execution of this case was familiar with Lawyer Hugh. He joked, "Law Hugh, why do I feel that this case is your own business? I see that you are not so concerned about other cases." Lawyer Hugh said, "Just treat it as my own case. This case is more important than my own case." Lawyer Hugh obtained 2 rulings at the same time. One was the ruling on debt to equity swap, and the other was the ruling on lifting the seal on the shares. Because he was waiting at the court all the time, there was no need to send it by mail, so he got it 2 days earlier than Ronald. And it was this 2-day time difference that allowed Lawyer Hugh to complete the change registration of the shares. By the time Ronald received the ruling on the debt to equity swap, the share structure of the building materials company had been changed and adjusted. Shadowy Express, represented by Lawyer Hugh, held 30 of the shares. Heather held 49, and other small shareholders held 21. On the evening of the day the registration change was completed, Heather hosted a dinner for Lawyer Hugh in the VIP private room of the Hilton Hotel in Ashton City. Lawyer Hugh arrived at the banquet on time and was arranged by Heather to sit in the main guest seat. Lawyer Hugh found that there were 5 young people and a middle-aged man in the private room, all of whom he didn't know. Heather stood up and introduced Uncle Schmidt. "Dear friends, I would like to solemnly introduce you to Uncle Hugh, whom I often mention to you. He's a great lawyer. Uncle Hugh is our family's benefactor. If it weren't for Uncle Hugh, there would be no Heather today." After introducing Lawyer Hugh, Heather began to introduce the other friends. The first one she introduced was Boss Schmidt, who was sitting next to Lawyer Hugh. Yes, this Boss Schmidt was the one who instigated Ronald to do the real estate project. Boss Schmidt, in his early 40s, started his career in decoration engineering. When he first started, he didn't have much money. He took on a large project, but had no funds to purchase materials. So he found Alistair, Shadowy Stories. Alistair felt that Boss Schmidt was a man of action and helped him advance more than $2 million worth of materials without hesitation. As a result, the project lost money. The client's business lost money. The boss ran away and not a penny of the project funds was paid. Boss Schmidt not only couldn't pay back the money for the materials, but also couldn't pay the workers' wages. He had no choice but to run away to Florida. A large part of the money that Alastair was accused of embezzling was the money that boss Schmidt hadn't paid back. After arriving in Florida, boss Schmidt started another decoration company and did well. When he saved enough money for Alastair and was ready to repay the money, he learned about Alastair's misfortune. So he found Heather through his channels and hoped to return the money to her. However, Heather said she didn't want the money and wanted boss Schmidt to do her a favor. After listening to Heather's plan, boss Schmidt immediately said that he would help and return the money. So he returned to Ashton City from Florida, opened a branch, and through a friend's introduction, got in touch with Ronald. This led to Ronald's real estate development. Boss Schmidt said, "Hello Schmidt, oh, Alastair, a debt of gratitude that I will never be able to repay in this lifetime. Being able to do my part for Miss Heather makes me feel a little better." Heather said, "Uncle Schmidt, you're welcome. You took the crucial first step. You did a great job. It was you. If it were someone else, they would have been exposed long ago." The others also chimed in. Uncle Schmidt's acting skills are worthy of an Oscar. Heather pointed to a spirited young man with short hair, a suit, and gold-rimmed glasses at the bottom of the table, and continued to introduce Joey, a shareholder of my trading company, and also my close comrade in arms. This guy is a standard diamond bachelor. His father runs a trading company in Hong Kong with an annual trade volume of hundreds of billions of dollars. This time, he is playing himself. Did follow the victims. Irene, a lawyer and international lawyer, opened a law firm in Sydney and is also a shareholder of my trading company. She is the mastermind behind this plan. Daniel, a shareholder of my trading company, a rich second generation. His family is in the logistics business, and it was listed in Hong Kong last year. By the way, the 30% stake in our building materials company is now in the hands of Daniel's holding company. Your legal fees, Uncle Hugh, are also paid by their company. The Zhongyi Express is a subsidiary of their group. Charlie is shareholder of my trading company. His father runs a security company, a very large one, with overseas business. You can sell those in a trading company. Listening to Heather recount her experiences over the years, lawyer Hugh felt even more that this stubborn little girl had grown into a powerful person who could easily manipulate things. He envied Heather, envied her friends who could, for a common goal, unconditionally and at all costs, make plans, take risks, and do their best. At that moment, he became even more convinced of his judgment. Ronald was finished. The group of relatives of the Croft family was also finished. Ronald's backer, his support, was also finished.